Well, off my head, I can think of the immediate response that modern people have towards ritual. The familiarity that they have with respect to it was the first shock I had, and the overall receptivity to reasonably well formulated indigenous wisdom, the kind that is chewable by Western understanding, because in the midst of all the thirst and hunger for spirituality, there is still the Cartesian logic associated with it. And so it is something which I have found quite refreshing to be able to, cook a version of African spirituality to Westerners in such a way that they could swallow it. Certainly, what I've found encouraging really has come from the rather spontaneous embracing of a wisdom coming from Africa, particularly a Dagara version of it, in a way that I wasn't expecting. More often than not, if you're coming from Africa to this part of the world, you'd have no idea that anything that you represent and any kind of knowledge you have acquired in your own little community will be of any interest to anybody here, simply because of the manner in which this culture has advertised itself to third world cultures in general, and particularly indigenous cultures, that they are superior, they need nothing, and in fact they have everything anybody over there should need. So the big surprise has been indeed the denunciation of this kind of propaganda, which in turn has resulted in a better appreciation of my own indigenous culture, because of the open-hearted, open-handed welcoming of it in this part of the world. Well, the fundamental of Western predicaments really has to do with the crisis of the soul, the illness of the spirit. I also have to mention the fact that the source, at least the diagnostic of such a situation, reveal a latent disconnectedness with any genuine sacredness. Consequently, the first thing I would like to suggest is at least give the whole thing the benefit of the doubt. Enter into this field with a mind to give a chance to your spirit to heal. Approach the other world with a hope that you might find something in it that your own culture has failed to offer you, and that in doing so you might end up being an artisan in the salvation of your own culture. And so this is the kind I would like to encourage people who find themselves blocked by all sorts of unknown conditionings in the face of a sacred they have no way of dissecting in the manner consistent with their own upbringing. And so in doing so, they're at least offering themselves a new adventure that might perhaps lead them to a place of betterment. And if it doesn't, at least there shall be no damage. The only thing to regret is that a little bit of time has been put to wrong use. But I doubt that, having had the experience of witnessing the manner in which people suspicious of this, who have given it the benefit of the doubt, including major skeptic, have ended up embracing it with so much vehemence that it has come to me as a shock, a surprise. The instantaneous, almost instantaneous embracing of indigenous culture, at least the African brand, also came along with this plethora of demons and projections and assumptions, resulting in more dysfunction than I would have hoped to. For one, I should have learned that when Westerners embrace an indigenous culture, they tend to do that in a way that suggests a rather ungrounded romanticism, a fatal attraction to the exotic, and resulting in an impossible expectation. The heal me now, take care of me right away kind of people have eventually given me the sense that they perceive this kind of wisdom as essentially commodifiable, in the sense that they needed to indeed purchase it right away if they could, because of the immediate need they have for this kind of material. I've seen it time and again, and turned that internally, resulting in an introspection that reveals to me that maybe I'm part of the problem, because of the angle of presentation of the material. I've ended up conveying maybe too bright a picture, too positive an outlook, and as a result maybe falling into the trap of somewhat of a misrepresentation. People had to understand that you don't gain an enlightenment over a weekend workshop. That is unreasonable, and that is too high an expectation placed on somebody whom you want to look at as a teacher. And I have discovered over the years that these drive-by or fly-by workshops or seminars, those random lectures here and there, have only contributed to the spread of the wisdom in a fashion that seemed to be trapped in the modus operandi of a cultural phenomena, in which if you're the carrier of any exotic wisdom, you got to prepare yourself for being on the, call it, lecture trail, and expect to show up at various institutions that actually express their interest in the material that you have with somewhat of an assumed conditioned reservation, like, here's a space for your ancestors' ritual. There shall be no candle because of fire restrictions, but we need an ancestor ritual to heal. Figure it out. And so, of course, I found myself realizing the challenge that means, to try to figure out, to do something that is usually not done anywhere near in this kind of context, and yet being expected to do so by people who have no idea that this is not possible. All they thought was, here are four walls and the ground, just do it. Make us fine tonight. So these are the kind of things I should have thought about earlier, The people, most of the time, whom I've taken to Burkina Faso, have most of them fallen into a spell, a kind of daze, or should I say, epiphany, that even increased their vulnerability and their naivety. Over the years, since 1991, I've watched with much grief the way in which two cultures will come together and show a modality of interaction that is a clear display of the misunderstanding, the ground of misunderstanding that they entertain among themselves, unbeknown to themselves. And realizing that even while this is unfolding, my role there becomes completely nullified. I have no way of telling them, look, how you see this is not the way it is. And you too, how you see the other one is not the way the other one is. There is indeed a kind of fatal attraction between the postmodern and the indigenous. What that says is not really clear, but the danger it highlights are quite clear. And I'm saying that because over the years I've seen fatal accidents occur, which I could see coming, but could not say anything, because anything I said was completely misunderstood or even interpreted as hostility, reminiscent or revealing of a person with a controlled malady. And so as a result, I've come to learn the lesson the hard way. It is not at all possible for an encounter of this nature to happen without any form of skirmish in there, without a problem. Mm-hmm. The problem intrinsic in this whole thing has a lot to do with the understanding of the culture. Being a bridge is less of a problem than actually the demand associated with this culture in the face of another culture that is willing to share its wisdom. Personally speaking, I've had to invest so much of my time studying at universities in the hope of finding the proper formula for articulating concepts that are barely existent in the modern culture. And still realizing when I was able to do that it was not getting across. But that poses a lesser problem than the other one that has to do with the natural endangerment that one puts oneself into, who wants to be this kind of bridge. My experience has shown me that there's more adversity in this work than there is cause for celebration of any type. Beside the fact that most of the news that comes to my attention are bad news about one type of emergency or another, news about one type of conflict or another, resulting in one person's desire for this work being higher than the other, and the whole thing surrounding what people have come to call the inner circle, members of the inner circle versus those who are trying to be members of that circle. The complexity surrounding this work is enough to actually caution any person who is interested in taking on this job out of it. The other part is what happened the moment it appears that there is some form of groundbreaking or another. Call that success if you want. That's when all the demons awake. Where's the intention of terminating this whole thing altogether? And it has been my experience. I've spent more energy fighting against those demons than actually doing the work that I was called to do. Why is it that way? The only way I can understand it is that more often than not, the culture that hungers for anything redeeming or redemptive is also the culture who, perhaps unbeknown to itself, is working to maintain the status quo. I cannot help but seeing it this way, because my experience has taught me that being careful is not enough. Being alert might begin to add something, but then again, if you are sufficiently alert, you will hear voices that caution you to bail out of this. And so why am I in it? Because there comes a time when you got to say what the elders say to themselves. You go forward, you die. You go backward, you die. So hell, go forward and die. You know. Which for me translated into this, that I went so far into this work that I couldn't back out. I just couldn't. Because every time I would try to, some catastrophe worse than the one I was facing that motivated me to entertain the thought would befall me, thereby getting me back right into where I started. And so as a result, I've come to this understanding that when Spirit calls you to do something, when the ancestors expect you to be on a certain track, the issue is that it's not up to you to invoke whatever amendment has been made in the invisible text of autonomy. It's not up to you to decide when you should draw the line. There is more to you than meets the eye. And you're only a member of a team that is working. And therefore, you can't quit like that. That's the short I can say about this. Well, that's quite obvious to me when I look at it from my indigenous African perspective. I would tend to want to say that most of the problem of modernity are a direct result of a dysfunctional relationship with ancestors. The issue at hand is that for a Dagara person like me, it's inconceivable to think about going into the future in a reasonable and reasonably sustainable fashion without a hard look into the past. Not to suggest that the ancestors belong to the past. No, far from that. What I'm saying is that without a live ancestral connection, it is close to impossible to envisage a future that can be as bright as the spirit of a person can wish for. And this is why it is an important thing, and even a viable suggestion, that most of the ills of modernity have to be traced down to what the status of their relationship with ancestors is. And you will begin to shed light into what needs to be done. I always like to tell people that, see, we all become a lot wiser after we're dead. Why? Simply because the modus operandi of the existence in the other realm is not to be likened to the one here. Besides, they're two different dimensions. They're two different frequencies of vibrations. And therefore, there's a kind of illumination, an epiphany that followed the death that transits the person from the fleshly existence to the energetic existence. And this has to be taken seriously because we tend to create so many compartmentalized spaces to fit various people in. For instance, in this dimension, you know, once you make a mistake, you always refer to from the perspective of that mistake. There is that unspoken assumption of the unredeemability of the human being. That's why, you know, criminal remain criminal the rest of their life. That is why people live their life trying to avoid having a record, you know, a record. The problem was that is what eventually stretches itself to the other world, so that ancestors, that is to say, the dead forebears who, during their lives, were, you know, less than wise, you know, made mistakes that a lot of other people paid for, and so on and so forth, are still kept within that kind of framework, as if even death didn't redeem them. Maybe that's the reason why the main religious creed in Western culture, namely Christianity, tend to come with two worlds. One is hell, that where nobody want to go, but unfortunately most people wind up there, and heaven, in which there's a limited amount of space for everybody. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is important that we detach ourselves from the thought that ancestors who once had a record in this dimension are still carrying that same frequency in the other. And that more often than not, the one so-called ancestor we have bigger problem with are the ones who are likely to be on a standby to radically invest themselves in righting what was wrong during their existence in this plane. So they become a much more vibrant asset, unfortunately in use most of the time, because those they're directly connected to, namely their descendant, are shopping for other type of ancestors, trying to find refuge there, simply because they're still stuck in this dysfunctional merry-go-round in which they see their forebears as totally unreliable and therefore irredeemably doomed. You know, so they're seeking redemption somewhere else. The issue that I see that needs to be dealt with as quickly as possible is linked to a form of healing or another. And that's the reason why I bring the diagram model of ancestralization, in which there is room indeed to show an acknowledgement to the dead by way of escorting them to what my culture believes is the place of their empowerment, the realm of the dead. And from there, to give them the news of this dimension with the strong expectation that they need to intervene now that they are in a place of empowerment. And so I found that this model at least could begin to give people a chance to at least attempt something, to try something, as opposed to working hard, investing themselves in the perpetuation of dysfunction, as if somehow this down the road is going to make things right. You know, it is an elder saying that the piece of log does not become a crocodile because you keep it in the water long enough. And so it's not by denying the ancestor that sooner or later things are going to get better. They actually get worse. It is important to stress this point because it has to do with the fact that we are indeed on a standby for delivery of blessings coming from that side, and our refusal through various attitude towards the ancestors is delaying our healing, basically. And if it is true what they say, that as below so above, or as above so below, I don't know which one is first, therefore we have to realize that the intensification of the human crisis might be an echo of an unsustainable and bearable crisis going on in the other world. That is a direct result of the severance of the line of connection between the two worlds, one that is quite necessary, because the idea of community, of family, with respect to continuity, has always been linked to two worlds, this world and the other. One world cannot enjoy harmony without the proximity of the other, without fusion with the other. And this is why we cannot successfully implement community without the presence of the dead, the presence of the ancestors in there. Modern mobility is symptomatic of the psyche sense of homelessness, more so than the sense of disconnection with ancestors, because that one is taken for granted. The issue that is in effect now is that these recent arrivals have indeed put on their record perpetration of what we may call inhumane atrocities and other, as part of their desire to take over places that have nothing ancestral to them, directly at least. The resulting effect of that is something they forgot, that has to do with the fact that having left a place that has the signature of ancestry, and therefore underscoring identity, and finding oneself in a place other than that, simply raises the issue of displacement, of course, or misplacement. And when that takes place, the issue is more about what is the connection between the self as a newcomer and the place of destination, the place of arrival. In Bagara culture, of course, there is the assumption that a newcomer is, quote-unquote, a stranger, and therefore a guest of the Earth Mother, the Earth Spirit, which is why a stranger is considered a sacred person. A stranger is sacred because first that person has moved out of one place and has arrived in a different place that bear its own signature and its own energy. My sense is that although it is possible, remotely speaking, to become a member of the new place, I'm not quite familiar with the procedural forms associated with that, but I don't reject the possibility of it. But one thing that still remains very potent in this maneuver is the need for a certain respectful approach to the new place, given the fact that no place is without its spirit guardian. If that is the common belief, we have first to pay attention as to who should you check in with upon arriving at a new place. As part of the self-care project in order to gain the kind of acceptance resulting in the sort of well-being that perhaps will result in becoming, as spiritually speaking at least, a citizen of the new place. Yeah. And so there is indeed a huge problematics associated with this that can be seen in the relatively reckless mobility the modernity tend to associate with. Yeah. Well, first there has to be an explicit extroverted show of respect and a display of a significant amount of humility and foreignness in association with the place. Now, from within this kind of attitude, various ritual choreography can grow, including a way of tending to the pre-existing sacredness that was there prior to the arrival of others, and in doing that, do so with the idea as to whether the earth, the spirit of the place, might have some suggestion on where to sign up or to sign in, where to register for maybe something as simple as a blessing that spirit of the place might have for us. Let's start there, as opposed to whatever conceived blessing the eye may have for the place. Understanding that the arrival in the place was not in response to a letter sent to the self to come over. You gotta understand that. So I think that from a more contemporary perspective, the responsibility of anyone, including those of you who are expressing or at least interested in exploring this field, you might have to begin with various ritual offering, gifting the spirit of the place with something that is an expression of the heart desire to find a new home, to contribute to a certain kind of restoration, noting that it is indeed part of any kind of culture that when you arrive somewhere, as a stranger, you bring a gift to show that, hey, where I come from, this is the fruit of that place, and I'm bringing this to share here. The issue is that when this is not done, and the resulting attitude is to begin exploiting, is that eventually the earth spirit, the spirit of the place, takes notice, and in the immediate there may not be any kind of reaction. At least it might not feel that way, but in the long term, a person who looked back might realize that certain things have been happening that are harmful to sustainability, and that could be traced down to an attitude that was disrespectful in the beginning. And that's why, as we speak about that in this time, we should realize that it is more or less the situation that is prevalent in the 21st century America. We got to understand that those who are descendants of the displaced, the recent comers, have a responsibility to right what was wrong, and to do so with great deployment of humility, to do so with a renewed sense of love and attention to the earth, lest they become the one who pays the price of the mistakes of their forebears. It is a calling that those who are awake may pick up at one time or another. But I know that that calling is one coming from the spirit of this place that still is willing to extend a welcoming hand to all of us. And I think that that's the minimum that can be done. The gifting of the spirit of the place, of something purifying, renewing, transforming, knowing that in the end that kind of purification is ours to benefit from. And that's the whole point. And so it's a major undertaking. In doing so, you are the redemption of the future of this culture. In doing so, you are indeed enacting a rather positive representation, taking the blame for what other people did, simply on the basis that you are related to them. And you are not to be acting like they did. Instead, you show up in all your humility to present an unblemished apology, with the willingness to put in your entire self, not a divided self, a totally complete self, in this other life career, a priesthood, to mend the wound afflicted upon the spiritual place by the desecration of it. And this indeed is a very laudable task, but at the same time one that may span more than an individual lifetime, because of the enormity of it and because of its depth. And this is still the kind of thing that provides a viable dignity to the place, dignity to the person contributing to the harmonization or relationship between the self and the spirit of the place. I think there's probably no work better than that, than the giving of oneself, so that another place can move as close to its status of the origin as possible. I'm not ambitious enough to think that it could be restored back to where it was 600-700 years ago. But at least the simple gesture of a heart willing to take a risk in trying, that registers in the ledgers of the other world very, very vividly. The forces of destruction that are intent upon showing an ongoing disrespect to the spirit of the earth and to so-called environments and so forth, are not going to necessarily change as a result of a confrontation with those people who object against such an attitude. They all kind of authoritarian rules that always come up with various logical ways as to why damage should be done to the earth. One of the simple things is, just talk about creating jobs, and everybody will forgive you for all the damage you might want to do. The point at stake is the following, that those who are intent upon offering themselves as the repair agent of these kind of damages are people who should first go to the earth, to ask for guidance. There's such a thing as the beauty of showing up, even when you don't have any qualification for the monstrosity of the job in front of you. Just showing up with your bare hand make you qualifiable. That is the skill. That is the highest skill. And so people like that should not expect to finally graduate from a school complete with a certificate of ability to conduct a kind of healing ritual that would sweepingly take care of this whole problem, that should first recognize that showing up at the feet of Mother Earth with a humble attitude that shows recognition for a damage already done, and a damage so big that they don't even know where to start to repair. This attitude alone is a sacred one. It's a ritual attitude. And so they have to understand that that gesture alone will trigger intuitive choreographies and initiatives, spontaneous engagement with the earth in such a way that they will end up looking back with the knowledge that in fact they've been doing something, something constructive, something positive, injecting the kind of energy that deletes negativity without prior training necessarily. And so this is why the willingness to show up, knowing that you don't know, and knowing that the Spirit knows that you don't know, is a really laudable gesture, I might say. And it leads to all these doorways and gateways of consciousness that suggest that other forces from wherever place they are being hired to come and assist you in taking the proper initiative, in doing the right thing, you know. And so I can't just say, you know, those who are doing that, you know, these are the ritual they should learn. This is what they should know. This is preposterous. I cannot claim to be the one that knows what kind of ritual you should do in order to repair the relationship with the earth that has been damaged by others. Because in doing so, I will be claiming better knowledge of this place than you. That's grandiose. What if the very fact that you were born here makes you unconsciously more related to the frequencies of this place? And that all it takes is for you to listen to those frequencies, and you will hear the voice of the place telling you what you should be doing. What if? And so it's an important thing to let people grow by themselves, encourage them to grow, to enhance their consciousness towards the environment they're in, noticing therefore that they're not any different from the trees, they're not any different from the plant that is standing there. And in so doing, allow them to give a little boost to their own consciousness, to become more observing, more discerning, more noticing of what is going on. So wrong thing to define ourselves as redeemers, you know, who's bringing salvation to an otherwise beleaguered and beaten up state of a situation. This is just self-serving. It's another grandiose way. You know, I hear people talk about, let's save the earth. Who messed up the earth to begin with? And so in order to come across like you are a redeemer, you first have to make a mess somewhere while people are not looking, and then you turn around and walk in there with all the press looking, so that you look like, you know, you're the one who is bringing salvation to a dying place. No, it is important to listen. It's important to listen. It's important also to recognize through grief, the expression of it, showing how sorry you are, that somehow people who are associated with you were dead enough to do this. And describe yourself as a person who's just showing up not knowing what to do, but at least you're there, you see. Because then, and maybe at that time, you could begin to hear some voices that are telling you, okay, so just clean this one up, put some tobacco over there, and so on and so forth. You see, it might translate in your consciousness as, you just had an instinct and you felt called to do this. But either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You didn't begin by drawing a map of the choreography of your behavior when you get there. Then it's not a ritual. It's some kind of predictable series of choreographic moment. But the one in which you wholeheartedly submit to the vibration of the space, acknowledging your own mediocrity, really, with respect to it. The moment you do that, the more likely you might wake up some attention. You might begin to be the spotlight of certain kind of attention that could result in the beginning of a certain kind of healing. That's the most I can say about this. It seems like that's probably what we'll be talking about so far. I mean, more specifically, it might be a good idea to understand that from the point of view of Dagara, there is a certain kind of hierarchy of consciousness that places the higher consciousness as the plant, the natural world. There's the highest consciousness. And the second one being the animal consciousness. That's the second highest. And we, human beings, trailing behind. Of course, that doesn't sound right for, for a normal person who would like to think that they have domesticated the entire world and that it's a manifest destiny, to develop everything. Let's just say this, that our connection with the natural world make us part of the anatomy of the natural world. And if we were to develop a kind of mindset in which we can understand or acknowledge that the world, the plant, the earth, nature was there long before we occurred, it might be again another opportunity for humility to wonder, what is it that makes me not different from the tree I'm looking at? What is the kind of kinship that exists? What are the frequencies that I have lost that could have, if still alive, allowed me to hear the word of the tree as I walk past it? Probably saying, hello, how you doing, little one? Because trees are known to be usually very tall, look at it. You got to look up, you don't look down. So instead, we have lived a life so far away from that if by any accident we walk past a redwood who says, hello, little one, it will startle the big Jesus out of us, right? And so there's the problem, and there's a diagnostic of the issue right there. In my book of Water and the Spirit, where I relate the story of my own initiation, I mentioned the deep influence gazing at a tree had on me. And what I didn't talk about was the subsequent attitude that I've had whenever I will find myself near a plant, a tree. Anyway, that's not the reason why I'm not a vegetarian. But the basic thing for us to understand is that our distance from community, the crisis of identity intrinsically associated with modernity, and the confusion that is now rampant in the middle of the 21st century, really has a lot to do with, call it the denaturalization of the human psyche. Now I forgot your question, but you got to understand one clear thing, that as long as the gap between us and nature is not reducing itself and is increasing instead, we might be facing a much deeper crisis ahead. You got to understand, the other world doesn't know nothing about seriousness. The issue at hand is that any time I've had an encounter with the other world, and I mean that literally. We have little people in my culture that we call contemporary. Every time you meet them, they're playing around. They look like irresponsible people jumping around and finding you rather funny looking, serious. And so it has led me to wonder, where do we inherit this solemn attitude, in fact associated with the word serious? And I tried to understand that by way of trying to find out whether there is an equivalent in Dagara of the word serious. There is none. There's no word for serious. The closest word to it is literally translated red eye. That's a red eye. And it's even funny. But this is as serious as it gets. Because red eye means you can't close your eye. You got to keep it open because you might miss out on something. And so there is a direct connection between ritual and fun and also play. Where does it come from? We can see it in children whose world is all about play and the choreography of it. Why do we grow up and find this rather childish? As if childish is less important than solemn and serious. Have we ever tried to do it more playfully, just to see whether in fact there is a greater chance of success than the serious? So with all of this, the bottom line is that the further away from the sacred a culture grows, the more serious and solemn it becomes. Yes, it simply suggests that the closer a community or a people get to the sacred, the more access to joy, to playfulness, and to a lot of laughter. And so it's up to us to choose. Modern culture seems to understand that. Corporate world even understand that. That's why they have such a time as happy hour. Every day between 4 and 5 is a happy hour where the drinks are cheaper, but it's between 4 and 5. After that, everybody back to serious. Understand? We've got a problem with that. See, the playfulness associated with work has been shrunk so much down to an artificial happy hour that you cannot even be playful or come close to happiness without the help of a couple of glasses of heavy-duty liquors. That means the genes of laughter and happiness are becoming really thin. And we're approaching the idea of laughter and joy from a serious deficit. And that's why we need the substitute of liquor in order to make that happen. That being said, the fundamental piece in there is for us to look at ourselves from the perspective of the amount of joy that we're willing to bring into our life. How much of that is in there? And to raise the question that puts a balance between what we are able to achieve and the amount of joy that accompanies the initiative towards that achievement? Are our failures due to a rather pathological seriousness given to life? Or are the things we fail to achieve associated with a deficit in joy due to too many repression and repressed things within us that are blocking the channel of joy? I mean, these are pertinent questions that we should ask ourselves. You know, we can't just make a laconic statement saying that, well, there's not enough joy, there's not enough laughter, there's not enough playfulness. We have to associate that with our productivity, with our capacity to muster healing and transformation in our culture, and see whether it is not the reason why we have an industry called entertainment. So in other words, in order for you to laugh, you know, somebody must be over there making a fool of himself so that you can giggle a couple of times. The point in there is that it's revelatory of a deep pathology that is keeping us away from each other, keeping us away from the healing powers of joy and laughter. You know. Anyway, I don't want to be too serious. Well, what I do brings me a deep sense of peace inside. The core of what I understand as joy is a deep inner peace, the kind that is really hard to put in words. It has less to do with random laughter and superficial socialization and so on and so forth, and it has to do with a deep sense of joy experienced whenever change in the right direction is seen in a person in whose life I have intervened. The truth is I derive tremendous pleasure in it, and I think that this is something that everybody should be entitled to. This is radically different from entertainment, you see. I'm not entertained by that. I'm overjoyed by it. And at the same time, I can sense the pull to grief, and I take that as a sign that my heart is not closed, and that I derive joy for it. It is a contribution to the sense of peace, which for me is authentic. And so I stay in it regardless of its turmoil, and the fact that, as I said in the beginning of this session, that I hear more bad news than good news. I stay in it simply because one healing at a time is proportional to a massive influx of joy and peace inside of me. And this is something that I see being needed by most everybody in this field, who end up taking what they're doing too seriously, and as such become pretty much prisoner of a rather bad weather that they've chosen to lock themselves into. I think it's a good thing, and people have kind of blamed me for that my lectures are too funny, that whenever I start teaching something, every minute I have to add a little joke in it. I can't help it. I mean, don't take things too seriously. It is true we're all in pain, but sometimes you laugh at pain and pain get panicked. You start looking at pain with a strange eyes of the clown, and the pain says, usually this is not how these people behave, and they want to go somewhere else. So it is important to realize the healing aspect of this whole thing. And for me, after the gauntlets of 15 years in this work, I've realized the best healing for me in it is humor. To stay within the field of humor. And I think this is something that people should entertain. You know, let's get together and crack ourselves up with all kind of things. Because in the end, it is this inexplicable sound coming out of our throat chakra that sends a message to all that which want us to look so weighed down by the bad news that it can then enjoy watching us. The minute we're cracking up in front of it, then we started creating tremendous discomforts in it. And that's a show of our capacity to heal each other, as opposed to waiting for some kind of salvation agent to come down with a basket full of it to toss around. You know, that doesn't work. Or if it worked, only a few benefit from it, and the rest are left even hungrier than before. You see, and so for me, this is what I've ended up embracing, because my own salvation, my own well-being, rests on that, and I hope it could expand sufficiently to affect as many people as possible. Contagious laughter is healthy. All right. Thank you.